So formally introducing Shannan Gove today in our 5th Tech4Good webinar. Shannan is co-founder of Rosterfy, which is an extraordinary platform, a startup that's done some amazing things across the globe, really. Shannan is an expert in large-scale paid and volunteer workforce operations. Rosterfy started in 2010 and has subsequently facilitated some of the world's largest events, including Super Bowls 17, 18, 19, numerous World Cups and large-scale events across 5 continents. He's got a strong focus on enhancing the way sports events, charities and venues engage, communicate and train their on-demand volunteer and paid workforce. And is no stranger to webinars, eh? You've been doing a few of these over the last couple of months.
I think every man and their dog has been a little bit, to be honest, but it's been a long time coming. I think we've got a lot to talk about from the experience we've had. So it's great to join you guys today and hopefully share a bit as well. And
that's really the opportunity that we present through these Tech4Good webinars, is to share what's good in your world, what the opportunity is for volunteer leaders and for people in the volunteering sector to understand your exciting platform, because you've disrupted the technology quite a bit, I'd say, in the short amount of time that you've been operating relative to some of the incumbents. How would you describe that journey?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think our experience has been that we're coming from the top down, in that sense that we can cater for the largest mass workforce management in the world. I think Dubai World Expo is our largest contract, which will have over 1 million volunteers and a workforce team of significant size. And so with that needs to come some pretty incredible technology to automate a lot of the steps where you can't afford to be doing things manually when you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of volunteers and FIFA World Cups, Super Bowls, so I guess we're coming from that space of going, how do you automate as much as possible? And then how do you apply those learnings to small scale charities and community groups or sporting clubs that are still facing difficult times in either outdated platforms, or a lot are still using reg systems and using SMS and BCC emails. We've just launched what we call Rosterfy Rapid and Rosterfy Core, which are really scaled down versions of our platform, which really just focus on the needs and problems that people have in managing volunteers. Because even if you only have 15 to 30 volunteers on a regular basis, it's still a lot of time, because you need to give those volunteers the time and effort that they deserve, compared to treating them like numbers, which is what we're, I guess, trying to help our clients get away from.
Temporarily muted myself there while talking about every
I was wondering what was going on there.
Every man and their dog. I mean, my dog was actually making a hell of a noise. I don't know if you heard it in the background.
No, that's fine, mate. All good.
It was quite literally man and his dog around here this afternoon. But my dog thought, I'm just going to get comfortable and make a hell of a noise. So I thought I'd better mute while you were doing that. So apologies.
All fine.
So I was saying on mute that you've got a presentation for us. Would you like to kick us off on that? Before we start that, obviously, like last week, we encourage people to chime in during Shannan's presentation through the Q&A or the chat function. It's a small group, and so we've got the functionality here to get you to talk directly to Shannan if you've got something that you want to say along the way as well. So feel free. It's certainly an interactive session this afternoon. So over to you, Shannan.
Yeah. Or maybe even if the people that are joining us want to just put in the comments like where you're coming from, like what organization you're from, so that we can really cater it to you guys, because a lot of what we can go through can very, very easily be catered to your particular organization. So feel free to just pop in comments. And Scott, given I'm presenting now, you may be the one that will see things popping up or questions as we go. If you can just keep an eye on that, if that's all right.
Yep, absolutely.
All good. Awesome. No worries. So I guess today what I wanted to go through, and we did a similar webinar last week with a platform called Fundraising, a fundraising platform, an Australian company, but out of the UK. So we joined at the London-based one. And I guess what I wanted to talk about was, I think a lot of people are treating this as broad strokes, going, get your volunteers and help and get them out into the community. where it's not necessarily the case, where some organizations have no relevance to COVID and some do. And depending on which camp you land in, depends on the way that you can use this time now. And so what today I'll focus on a little bit is almost like the here and now, what's happening, which camp do you fit in? And then depending on those where you are, then what are some things that you can either be planning for the future, or, you know, engaging with your volunteer database now if you don't have any relevance to COVID, or if you do have relevance to COVID, how do you action that quickly and be able to call on your database for that, for the need? So that's probably the example. And then maybe at the end, a little bit of how we're now, not pivoting, but using our technology to see how we can help a lot of sporting clubs, and we'll probably start working with cafes and other things to help with the attendance tracking, which is becoming mandatory. So how do you just use little parts of our platform to help streamline that process and make it as easy as possible to record people's data and be able to report on that easily, if and when required. So that's probably a little bit of a summary there. Scott, all pretty clear for you? Or I've seen some comments come through. If you just want to summarize maybe where people are coming from, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, so we've got Emma from Greater Shepparton City Council. She's new to the volunteer role, 10 weeks in. Welcome, Emma.
Cool.
Carolyn Bischoff, she runs the Winged Horse Equine Welfare in Port Arlington, lovely part of the country.
Nice. Yep. 40
regular volunteers who mainly do feed out for 48 horses, ponies and care. Kirsten, formerly of Volunteering Victoria, now of Cancer Council Victoria. Nice to see you again, Kirsten. Helen Yorston from Bendigo, stalwart of the sector. G'day, Helen. Kathy Olden from West Gippsland Library, new role in volunteering community participation. Welcome, Kathy. Steve DeBisio, afternoon. Thanks for the webinar. I'm from the Yarra Ranges Council, managing an L2P program, supporting young people to get their licenses with the involvement of their volunteers.
Cool.
They're interested to know if Rosterfy could help matches for learners and mentors that have the same availabilities.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And guys, my details, either, I'm not sure if I've even put them in the slides, but feel free to just email me. I'll just put it in the comments now. Like, here we go. I might even jump into our own chat if I can.
Go for it.
There we go. I'll just put my email in here. And yeah, a link to our website if you just wanted to check some out while I'm talking in the background for our website. So awesome. So that's great, and a pretty wide range there of where we're coming from. A lot of charity and community groups, but also some city councils too. So yeah, we as a platform work with all of those subsets and those groups. So as I'm going, feel free to just ask questions as we go, because we've kind of seen it all, and no question's a silly question in this time. There's no silver bullets. So hopefully today, I'm reluctant to say that we have the answers to everything. So what I'm going to pull from is examples of our clients around the world, and also other people in the industry, and just hopefully using them as some reference points that you guys can lean on or share with your team as well. So hopefully if there's some come out of today, it's coming out with some reference points of going, well, here's an idea that these guys are doing, and maybe we could learn from it. So feel free, guys, to just jump in with as many questions as you like. All right, so I guess, who are we? So Rosterfy is a volunteer engagement platform. So I guess given we've got some time here, Scott, the background of how we got into technology was, we actually started a company called Event Workforce Group in 2010 out of university, and that was to provide motivated tertiary and university students with experience in the event space. So I was studying sports management at the time, and a lot of students like myself struggling to get experience. So we wanted to find a way to connect students with real life experience, and we're really proud with that, what we've been able to achieve with that business, which still runs today. I'm a director, but not day-to-day involved. And that's, we have about 25,000 young Australians on the database and staff over 2,000 events a year. And that's like the Grand Prix, Australian Open, a lot of the AFL, Cricket Australia. So linking motivated students into paid work. And I guess that's where in 2015, we got to the point of going, hey, we're in spreadsheets, and a lot of our staff weren't getting the best experience because we were sending them the BCC email, getting the name wrong, offering them roles, and then when they turned up, needing to change it because we're unorganized. And so what we did at that time was we said we need a system for this. We realized that there's a lot of really big HR systems out there. There was a lot of outdated volunteer management systems. And so we decided to build our own for our own need. And then we realized, hey, this system can relate to everyone in mass workforce management and sort of the ongoing community related volunteer management. And that's when we launched Rosterfy. And since then we've expanded around the world. We have offices in the US, UK, in Dubai, and in Melbourne, and have about 25 staff working for us. And so I guess we've learned a lot across the journey about how to automate the processes that take up a lot of your time. And I think everyone on this call, but volunteer managers, it's a key role. It's a certain type of personality that is a volunteer manager. And in my opinion, I feel like those personalities sometimes get wasted in the manual work. Not sometimes, a lot of the time, those personalities are wasted in getting drained by the work that's involved in managing volunteers, compared to, if you ask why they started as a volunteer manager in the first place, was to work with people and provide great opportunities. And I guess that's what Rosterfy exists to do, is to connect communities to events and causes they're passionate about. And that's hopefully streamlining those manual processes so that you can focus on what you're good at, which is engaging with people and making sure your program is growing for the cause that you represent. So yeah, that's a little bit of background about us. So as we said, feel free, guys, just to drop any questions throughout. I'll have a lot of live examples of clients that we've worked with. So if you want more detail, feel free to drop questions in. Please do. And then the little agenda there about here and now, sort of what I covered off before: proactive planning, supportive journeys, and return to sport at the end. But return to sport, given that the audience today is not so much sport, could absolutely be in the council's area, or if it's a university or a charity, if you're wanting to get back out and tracking things, and how do we help? And that's what I can talk about. So I guess here, just a quick sample of data that we've sort of seen around the world is that 80% of clients have been forced to cancel, postpone their events. That number is probably north of that, really. 40% of all not-for-profit volunteering has ceased completely. Campaigns and charitable events retaining, about 30% of their past year's revenue. So the revenue hit and the impact of that, I think this is the one thing that everyone's a little uncertain about, is going, what's the impact of this revenue hit on our organization? In the UK, as an example, and in Australia, of course, but in the UK, they have furlough. So a lot of, even now, some of our staff are on furlough at the moment, in terms of the government being able to support paying those staff, even though they can't do any work. But those metrics those support mechanisms will stop. And then what happens to the industry as a whole? And so, meaning that headcounts will be reduced inevitably. I think in councils and universities, a lot of our clients have seen that headcounts need to be reduced because the revenue has dropped so significantly. And Scott, would you agree with that? Are you seeing that in the charity sector as well?
Yeah, in fact, as our membership survey suggested, 65–70% have suspended volunteering in their organisation. Yep. So it works out to 200 million hours a week across the country. It's an incredible disruption, and a lot of beneficiaries, a lot of involvement, and the benefit that comes from involving has been furloughed, which is a really sad state of affairs.
Yep. And even a question for the guys who've joined us, like, has your organization been affected by staff, like reduced staff numbers? Because ultimately, this is where systems need to come into place, because in my opinion, volunteering has never been so important. Yes, right now the volunteers aren't able to go out, and it makes sense that people aren't just sending them out for the sake of it. But in the recovery efforts, especially when organizations won't have the manpower necessarily that they did before, the need for volunteers to support to get back to some form of normality will be crucial. So hopefully, if there's one thing we get out of today, is about not just shutting up shop and not communicating. It's about keeping your volunteers engaged for when you do need them, because you will. I think that's the simple summary there. I think my last point there about is never before has community spirit been so alive. So I think we've seen even through the bushfires here in Australia, the response that we all saw in terms of donations and people wanting to help. Sure, there's an element of burnout there, Scott. I've got no doubt that people have given a lot. And also a lot of people have been affected. So maybe those that previously volunteered have lost their own jobs. So in their personal life, how have they been affected? So they may not have the time to volunteer because they're trying to find work themselves and look after their family. So, and that will be something we touch on today about understanding your database and really diving into that and understanding the individuals that work for you compared to, like I said, treating people like numbers.
Helen from Bendigo has just commented that volunteering assessed in her community by about 85% with no idea when volunteer programs will be recommenced and staff stood down. So yeah, very disruptive, to use the term appropriately for a change.
Yes, correct. Yeah, so I guess, and maybe if guys, if you're listening, if you could just comment in there, please, about going, which camp do you fit in? About, can you be sending volunteers out now? Or are you like most, where your volunteers cannot be active in their previous capacity, which it sounds like, because that will really sort of dictate what we can focus on today. So guys, please feel free to just chuck a comment in there to be like, yep, we're stopped volunteering and we're not sure when we're coming back, or be good to understand some context so that we can really speak to your situations. So I'll keep moving, but feel free to drop some comments in there, please. And Scott, just grab them up as we go.
Sure.
All right, so I guess this is a situation where your volunteers can be utilised, and I think that's a really, really big one. And I've got a couple of examples there of some clients that we actively work with. So Starlight Foundation have used Rosterfy for the last few years as of Mother's Day Classic. And the third one there, California Volunteers, we don't work with actively, but I just thought I'd provide a different perspective compared to just looking at what we all know and see in perhaps in the news or are connected to. So what Starlight did really well with Rosterfy was about, they literally interviewed every single volunteer in their database. They set up times in the system for people to book in times basically for phone calls and for Zoom meetings. And from there, they started to segment the database into personas and why people come to join you in the first place. I think most people listening would all agree, you get volunteer burnout when you're putting people into roles and shifts that don't relate to why they came to you in the first place. So understanding who, like, what can you provide back to them? Like, and I think again, it's like, you don't want to be blasting volunteers with, hey, here's all the things going on. Start to segment your database into the needs and wants of your volunteers, because that's what systems can do. And a lot of that work can be automated for you so that your volunteers are getting a more personalized experience compared to potentially feeling like they're being leaned on time and time again of just saying, guys, we just need more help. And it also, in a funny way, the way we see it is like, if you're continually calling out all the time, then what's the desire? Why do people want to keep coming back? Because it doesn't feel like it's that almost that higher spot to be in these volunteer positions if they're always short and always falling short of those numbers. So if there's a way that you can start creating desire and linking to what people are with you in the first place, Starlight have found positives out of that. And the other part of that is segmenting into skill sets as well. So what can they bring to your organization that potentially you didn't realize you needed in the first place? And that relates very closely to Mother's Day Classic Foundation. So for those that don't know, Mother's Day Classic Foundation, they run the Mother's Day Classic massive event. They do a lot more, but this is the big event. I think 100 locations around Australia, potentially up to 100,000 participants. And this is all meant to happen on Mother's Day a few weeks ago. And they were able to turn their event into a virtual event in the space of about 10 days. On our website, if you were interested in learning about how to turn your events virtual, we interviewed the CEO, Zara Lawless of Mother's Day Classic, and she talked about that experience and also how they engage their volunteers. So if you wanted to find out more about that, feel free to hit up our website. But some key points for them was they identified the gaps. So what they realized was that the skill sets they needed to put a virtual event on, they didn't have necessarily internally, And given the revenue hit that they faced, they couldn't be out hiring more graphic designers or virtual event designers, these sorts of things. So what they did was actually go to Rosterfy and understand what skill sets were out there. And then they worked out the gap, what they faced in their organization. So what shortfall was there for skills? And then they matched those skills into their organization for graphic designers, for content producers, for video producers. And in the space of a day, they had to shut applications because they had over 75 really skilled applicants that were willing to help them. Because I think for Mother's Day Classic, and I'm sure a lot of your organizations, people have a real strong connection to them and they're willing to help. So it was about putting out the ask, a very specific ask, and then segmenting their database really well to understand who the right people were. So a few comments in there, Scott.
There is Shannon. So Carolyn says, in regards to your previous question, our main volunteers are on site at the sanctuary, so that is returning to near normal. We did have to limit originally, although outreach problems are at a halt at the moment, as are school on-site visits and other community groups. Helen speaks of fit, healthy volunteers under 60 of age are being connected with delivery of essential services like food share, nothing else available for volunteers.
Sure.
Kerry Ann talks about volunteers moved from visiting to phone calls and letter writing, taking more volunteers on during this time. So that's great. Emma says council's volunteers cannot be used at the moment, e.g. Meals on Wheels, Performing Arts, Visitor Centre, etc. Steve says our programs have been suspended and not sure what it will look like when we return. A number of our volunteers are in a high risk category.
Yep.
So
yeah, that's really interesting. I think the council point there, since I've moved back to Geelong, we've actually started working with a lot more councils. So for context, we're the volunteer platform for the City of London, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, a lot of Houston, a lot of America's largest cities use Rosterfy as a central volunteer management system. And so since moving back to Geelong and realizing, hey, we don't work with barely any councils here in Australia, I guess I went in and presented to the City of Greater Geelong, and they had a definite need for what we could help with. But through that experience, I learned about the fact that a lot of their volunteers were in the high risk category of over 60, which I think is the case in not just in cities, in a lot of charities as well. And so the need then to find potentially younger volunteers to come in. And so we're also pretty heavily involved with the mass participation industry. And they again rely heavily on the over 60 volunteers, and they're already starting to get a lot of pushback from example, like Lions Club saying, we won't be able to come back and volunteer. And so there's almost two ways I see people approach this, is that some organizations basically go, well, the result of that means we just need to reduce our volunteer numbers. The other side is that organizations say, well, what do we need to do to find other volunteers that can fill the gap of those that are now not able to help us, or at least for the short term, not able to help us? Scott, does that make sense, sort of the different approaches people can take? Yep,
that's brilliant, Shannon, spot on.
Yeah, and I think, and there's no right or wrong answer, but I guess from our perspective, it's if there's ever a time for engaging, for example, local university students, they're not at campus as much at the moment. They are looking for things to do. How do you make your program attractive to younger students to come in to potentially fill the holes of where people may not be coming back to volunteer? So, even looking at a tack to go, where else are we going to find some volunteers, and using this time appropriately. My last example there with California volunteers was about how they could align to trusted partners. So sure, you can't do anything with your volunteers at the moment for some organizations, but a lot of the time your volunteers are volunteering for their own good as well, in terms of wanting to feel connected. So making sure if you were to share your database with someone, that they were aligned and trusted with what your vision is. You're not just, obviously data security as well, you're not just sharing email addresses or everything, but doing your research, seeing if there's an organization that can align to you, and just giving your volunteers the opportunity to stay connected, compared to your organization saying, look, we can't help at the moment, and shutting up shop. So that's just a few examples that we've seen for those that can be utilized. Now that can't be utilized. So I think this is more relevant to potentially everyone here today. So recruiting for the long term, and one of the guests mentioned that they've actually recruited more volunteers through this period. And I think that's very true for a lot of organisations that have been proactive and are seeing the way to recruit more. Pancreatic Cancer UK increased their database significantly through this period because they said, we can't do anything at the moment. So that means, but there's a lot of people that are skilled and that are out of work. So how do we get these people? Because never before have people been more available to be helping. So they actually set up a real recruitment drive and spent dollars into it to increase their database, to then engage with that database over the next few months so that when they're returning, because they understand how important volunteers will be for the recovery of their organisation, giving, I think, the inevitable headcount reduction that will be coming in London in September, October when furlough stops. And I think in Australia, it will be very similar when the government support stops, that headcounts will be reduced even further. It might be tough, but I think people might almost be in a false sense of security in a way of where we sit at the moment, given the government support that's happening. When that stops, organisations will look seriously at how they can reduce costs, offices, these sorts of things. And that's when the volunteer database will be crucial. So don't be thinking about it then, thinking about it now. Hopefully this doesn't happen, but I'm just sort of talking about some examples there. Scott, does that make sense? Not too harsh?
No, look, I think it's sage advice, Shannon. I think, great to kind of showcase, what others are doing in this space, because it is a fundamental issue. And failing to prepare is going to be preparing to fail, as they say. So great that you're bringing this up now.
Yeah, sure. So another one was staying front and center. So Zara Lawless from Mother's Day Classic actually shared this with me, that I believe she volunteers with National Art Gallery Victoria. And so what they did was they just made sure their content and communications were kept up to date, and really almost running different campaigns through this period to keep people involved. And that might be sort of featured stories on art galleries or artists that people are really interested in. So that it's not just going to sleep, basically. So she used that as a good example of an organisation that ran really organised, structured communications that weren't just sporadic, once a month, this sort of thing. So, and the other one was about giving activities to be doing, like online material or training or little short courses that relate to what they do. I think that can be a really big one for organisations. I think a really big thing coming out of this, and what I'm learning from the mass participation industry, is the need for online training and induction. So as an example for you to send your volunteers out in the future, who knows, but people are talking about the need to make sure your volunteers are completing inductions on how to act and behave in the recovery efforts. So how are you going to maintain and create training modules now for when those times occur, so that you're ahead of the curve? And there's lots of training platforms out there. Rosterfy has a part of it that does online training, links to the volunteer system. Now, one of the next ones there is around innovation. So what can you be doing right now if you can't be sending volunteers out? And the Miami Dolphins, it's an NFL team. It's very different to what we all are here. I understand that. But what they did was they built out what we call reward and recognition. So we worked with them to build this out. It's a way to allocate points to shifts that people fulfill. And then you can have a live tracker of how many points you're earning as a volunteer that can then be transacted for example, merchandise or discounted memberships. So for your organizations, it doesn't need to be a sophisticated online system. It might just be a way that you can build out a program that incentivizes volunteers however you think that might suit. And that goes back to the Starlight point about engaging with your volunteers and understanding what would be attractive to them and what would incentivize them to keep coming back, and these sort of things. Scott, makes a bit of sense, do you think?
Yeah, look, I love it. As you say, there's a bit of a pressure on some of the volunteer managers to kind of show their efficacy during this time when their volunteers aren't there. So this is a great way of thinking of other ways of getting ahead of the curve so that you can do these things. So when the volunteers do come back, they've got a chance to come back even stronger and better.
Absolutely. So then I've mentioned reward and recognition. I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit there, but the other 2 points there are automations and training and inclusion. So automations is a really strong part of what Rosterfy does. It's, I think a prime example of an automation would be send email after volunteer registration. Every system does that. That's basic work. What our platform can do is based on any action, you can set the response. For example, person hasn't completed induction, send reminder. Post-shift checkout, send post-shift survey automatically. Send post-shift certificate, follow 24 hours following checkout. Every single sort of step and manual task that you need to do as a volunteer manager, how do you set that as an automation? And that's what we've spent the last 12 months behind the scenes building out with our clients. And one example, and you may not have heard of South by Southwest, but it's one of the largest technology conferences in the world in Texas. That event was meant to happen a few months ago, where they would have been using Rosterfy, but their headcount is going to be slashed by about 70%. And so we've been working very closely with them to understand what automations can be set up, because their volunteer numbers are thousands and thousands. So how do they still recruit? They've probably got 8 to 10 steps that volunteers need to go through in order to become a volunteer. And I know each of your organizations will still have steps like an induction, like a working with children's check. How do you automate that onboarding so that it's not a volunteer manager sitting there waiting for emails to come through and then sending emails back and checking if someone's done something? How do you automate those processes for the purpose of getting to a short list of qualified candidates that are ready to go for when you need them? So how do you automate as much as you possibly can, and maybe think outside the square of what is possible with an automation compared to thinking the basics like an auto email back after an application is an automation. You can do a lot more. So that's something that I think is really important.
Shannan, just on that note, so these South by Southwest Miami Dolphins, they're really large organizations. Your Rosterfy Rapid, is that offering the same sort of functionality yet, or is that in the pipeline?
No, absolutely. So what we've done is created Rosterfy Rapid, Core, and Enterprise. All of those references are enterprise. They're really large in terms of those sizes. And I'm only using them today as going, here's what others are doing and what can we learn from or bring back to your organization, is going, hey, this could be really cool. Even if it is a bit more manual, we could implement something like this. In Rosterfy Rapid, if you jump on our website on the pricing page, you'll see what's included there. Rosterfy Rapid is the full end-to-end volunteer management system at a really low cost point, basically. And then Rosterfy Core is probably what will start bringing in some more of those functionalities, like online training and induction platform as part of the solution. But what we're doing with a lot of customers that might be a Rapid customer and going, you know what, we love the idea of a reward and recognition. So our platform is simple as turning things on and off. You would just toggle that functionality into that customer and maybe they'll pay a little bit more for it, but the benefit should outweigh the cost is the way that it works. So it's almost like a bit of a self-service model that we can create accounts. And I think that's why we've, I guess, seen so much growth at Rosterfy, is that our platform is, instead of hitting brick walls, it's more finding opportunities and going, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Or, oh, wow, you can just toggle that in for my account. Cool. So it's that sort of, that's kind of what we exist to do and keep innovating, I guess, in that sense. Does that make a bit of sense, Scott?
Yeah, that's brilliant, Shannan. That's just really great to know. Thank you.
Cool. And then the training speaks for itself. I've kind of spoken about it. How do you build in some online training? A lot of our clients have one on the volunteer portal. When they log in, they must complete an organization induction. Very simple. But then what a lot of our clients are doing now is actually having shift and event specific brief training per opportunity. So if you're at the council, you need to do Meals on Wheels. In order to apply or be in a shortlist to even see those roles, you must complete a Meals on Wheels induction first. In order to work in the library, you must complete a library induction about code of conduct. In order to work on the road, you need to do this. So how do you automate those modules sitting there so that you're not risking putting people out? Because that's another major thing we've seen with organisations and some cities in Australia, some big ones as well. Obviously, won't be naming names, but in terms of when volunteer numbers aren't you're not having extra volunteers for what you need. Some organisations are in the position of just needing to grab whoever's available and putting them into roles, but without a detailed profile of who that person is or what induction they've completed or what briefing material you've tracked that they've read, you could be sending anyone out, and that's the risk. So how do you automate that those people wouldn't be able to do that unless you can? And I don't mean to be saying it's easy to find volunteers, or that it's because most organisations are in the position of not being able to fill volunteer positions. So hopefully the last slide about how to increase your recruitment drives at the moment, so that when you need your volunteers, you should be in a place of having a qualified shortlist. And now I just wanted to put in there about the inclusion. So Spark Event Group, which was formerly Event Workforce Group, which I'm the director, what their team came up with was about going, how do we use this time to include some groups that potentially we haven't been able to work with in the past. So they're looking at seeing how they can make opportunities more feasible for staff with physical disadvantages. And so how do they educate our clients about the need that, hey, on some of the shifts coming up, we might have some people that might not be able to get upstairs. How do we work with these sort of things? So just looking at that, that's another group of people in the community that find volunteering just as important, if not more important, than able-bodied people, as an example. So how do you include those people? And they're just using that time. So I just thought it might be a bit of a reference point. Now, return to sports safely. This could be returned to anything safely in regards to the need to track attendance, schools, councils, whatever it is. So a small component of Rosterfy is you can track attendance. So check in, check out. That can either be a kiosk, like an iPad that sits at the council, people check in, check out. It could be a coach then on his mobile phone has his players and he needs to check in every time. That could be or it could be individuals like a Meals on Wheels. One volunteer would be able to check themselves in and out on their phone. And then the organisation can very simply pull reports on either the segmented group or on just for the whole month. Like how many hours has our organisation volunteered in the last month? And I know a lot of volunteer managers have pressure from above, from maybe the CEO or the board, saying, what's our impact been? Like, what are we doing this for? And volunteer managers traditionally are probably spending a lot of time in spreadsheets or emails trying to work that data out. So I guess we try and make it a bit easier in default reports that you can pull at the click of a button on impact, basically. Scott, anything else on that? Or maybe just a question to people listening, if you're facing any need, or if you're reading anything about the need to track attendance, or if that's relating to the way you're sending your volunteers out, is that a problem you guys are facing, or maybe it's not something that's live yet for you guys? Yeah, be interested to talk about it. Scott, what do you think?
Look, great question, Shannon. Volunteers are going to need to be carefully managed, aren't they? Regardless of their sector, and it's going to be something that a bit of forethought is going to go a long way to manage. We've all hopefully downloaded the COVID Safe app, and so it's going to be those sorts of pre-planning sort of steps that demonstrate that you've managed or considered the risks associated with volunteering that's going to be so fundamental to make sure that you're tracking which volunteers were in. I mean, if you're the horse group, making sure that who was there on which day, and if there were 2 or 3 together, who was it in case one of them comes down with COVID or something like that. And coincidentally, here's Carolyn from the horse group saying tracking ours manually sign in and out at the moment. Would love to have it automated using an iPad. Classic case in point. And
that's the Carolyn. You're not alone. It's very normal. It's what, like, every day we're probably getting 15 requests from different sporting clubs, community groups, venues saying this is all manual. Like the Sport Australia, like the organisation responsible for helping sports get through this, sent a PDF template which people download. it's so much easier to be able to track this stuff online, because it's almost, when you think about it, it's like, who's going to have egg on their face in 3 months' time when you've put your volunteers back out there, and in a week's time someone's had COVID, but you haven't known who they are or where they are. It's unfortunately, it's often coming back to the volunteer team who are putting these people out. So, and we all know it. I've been there myself with paper sheets, signing people up and tracking attendance. These things get lost. They get destroyed. If you're trying to keep 3 months worth of every daily check-ins, it can be a very confusing and difficult to report on process, which may become pretty critical in 3 or 4 months' time if we try and sort of look into the future of what the ramifications might be if that wasn't done correctly, and if that was done on a sheet that might have been lost. How do you track that online? And so, yeah, we're getting a lot of requests each day to see how Rosterfy can help that in 3 simple ways. And that is, you can import your schedules and your people in the system. That will then create attendance sheets that'll be online on your iPad, on your phone. And then lastly, at the click of a button, pull reports based on, I want to know what Meals on Wheels did last month and where they went. I want to know how Geelong City Council as a whole, what did we do? So hopefully it's something we can help with. And if guys, if you're facing these same things and just want to understand more, feel free to send me a message or whatever. I'll just put my email in there again to say, send us a note, and more than happy to jump on a screen share and show you what we can do. And to be honest with you, we're doing this for next to nothing, because we just know how important it is. And it's not costing us much as a business to do that and help with that. So yeah, happy to just have a conversation about it. Scott, pretty clear there? Any questions?
Yeah, that's good, Shannon. Carrie-Anne mentions, this is often an issue that we hear about, is older volunteers don't necessarily have mobile phones, or if they do, they're not a smartphone, or if they do, not a smartphone, this can make tracking difficult. I mean, given your technology company, how do you respond to that sort of challenge, Shannon?
Definitely. Just to be clear as well, I think we have close to 1 million volunteers on Rosterfy all around the world. The average age of that is about 55, 60, and a lot older as well. Like for a Super Bowl, 35,000 volunteer applicants, majority are over 60 years old. So we've been through this journey of older volunteers and needing them to make it really simple. So what our clients do that have the same problem there in regards to older volunteers is they give options. So for example, your younger volunteers maybe, or those that have smartphones, sure, give them the ability to check themselves in and out of shifts. But for those older ones, you give them the option, say, would you like to do it? No. Okay, sure. We'll track it for you. And it's a very simple process of, you can just go back to what you did before with them, and then you can add the data in yourself. So let's say it was 5 of 10 people you were sending out. 5 do online check-in themselves. The other 5 just simply call you or fill out a paper sheet. You can then jump into that online timesheet and just go tick, 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 tick for the rest of those other 5 that weren't able to do it on their mobile phone. So I totally appreciate where you're coming from with that. So we try and just make it flexible that you can still look after those people based on their needs.
Shannon, quick question. Can Rosterfy encourage volunteers to assist with rostering, e.g. volunteers nominate the time they are available?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. A big thing that we learned, so just for context, and time's going okay here, but what we've launched is what we call Rosterfy 2, which is the rapid core and enterprise level of our platform. And what we learned over the last few years is that a lot of organizations need to capture more data than just what they capture on the registration form. Your data might be pretty old. Maybe you've changed your policies. You need to get new things. Maybe you need working with children's checks. So what we've spent a lot of time building out is custom forms where you can very easily drag and drop questions into a form and send that online form directly to people that you need the answers from. And then with the automations, reminding people if they haven't done it, or even SMSs from the system going out reminding people. So a very simple way to do that would be either 2 options. One is on the portal, volunteer portal. You put up the time slots and the availability, so people just simply click and then you'll be able to see who's available. The second one is sending in an email a form to say, hey, here's the options of times, or you suggest what times are available on a calendar even. and that will then come back through to you as admin to see who can help, and then you can just drag and drop them into roles and communicate to them either individually or as a group.
Very good.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess if we continue on here, it's about 5 key takeaways. One is about consistency. Be consistent. I think we're all guilty of it at times where the volunteer manager is the same person running the comms and doing everything else. How do you get support in that area? One thing I learned actually on a webinar we did a few weeks ago was about how do you lean on your marketing department or others, or even a volunteer that might be able to help you with some content generation. If that's not your skill set, how do you, not just putting it all on your shoulders, how do you bring others in to help you? So being consistent with your comms. Second is around data grouping. So how do you start to segment your database really well? So in Rosterfy, there's a lot of group management functionality. So for example, it might be your Meals on Wheels group, might be your over 60s group that you want to communicate to them differently to your younger volunteers. How do you start to segment your database based on what they're wanting, why they're with you in the first place so that you can relate to them? Number 3 is automation. So how do you as volunteer managers stop doing the manual tasks that you are doing and automate as much as possible, in particular when things are most likely going to be changing for organizations over this next period? Number 4 is proactive planning. So how do you use this time to potentially come up with a reward and recognition, whether that's like the Miami Dolphins or whether that's just a simple couple of points for each shift you're doing so you can show your appreciation. Maybe proactive planning might be how do you automate certificates being sent to your volunteers after every single shift that they do as a way of saying thank you. So using this time now to get ready for when you are back and running, and then clear communication. So setting expectations, being honest to the fact that you might not have all the answers. Going, I appreciate the question, we'll get back to you in a few months. But don't just leave questions unanswered. I guess be open to feedback and these sort of things because everyone's having a tough time at the moment with that. So hopefully that's a couple of key takeaways for today for what we hopefully we can bring to the table. I don't know if we've got a bit of time here, so if people wanted to ask any questions specifically, be more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, you've got my details and you can very easily send me an email or check out our website and contact us through there. So what do you think, Scott?
Yeah, look, this has been great, Shannan. Really appreciate your time and effort this afternoon to be with us and to talk through Rosterfy, to make obvious, some of these opportunities for automation and for training and development that sometimes we may be asking ourselves what can or should I be doing, prioritizing and thinking about. And so I think this has been a really excellent session for getting us to to go back to those basics. And it's really exciting, Shannan, to see how you're catalyzing not only the sports sector but councils across the countries, across countries now, to value the volunteer effort. And it's not so much even only in rostering. I mean, you're also kind of tiptoeing a bit around impact and how we kind of catalyze that impact is and quantify it and report it. This is by all accounts really harmonious sort of arrangement to do that. So it's been a really great session, Shannan. Thank you. Just
one question I had almost, Scott, is this is a thing that we've picked up recently is how many organizations, and if people could put it in here, I understand we're not all charities listening here, but maybe for the charities that are, how many actually use their volunteer database to raise funds for the cause that they support? And the reason I ask that is that a lot of organizations we work with treat them as two separate things. Volunteers are there to help us and do the volunteer tasks, and then all of our community over on the other side are there to raise the money. That's a very broad strokes view. I understand everyone's different, but Scott, would you say that's a fair call?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And
so any feedback there, come on, throw it in the chat function.
Yeah. And so I think that's where fundraising actually, as a partner of ours, they did an event over in WA and they were short on their fundraising, so they went to their volunteer database. And I think it was about 40% of the volunteer database actively took up volunteering donations either themselves, or they created fundraising platforms themselves to then grow fundraising on top of it. And for me, I think it's just such a no-brainer that if someone is going to commit to your organization, that person would be the volunteer over, for example, the cyclist or the participant that might be there to do an event compared to raise funds. And I just think it's a really interesting thing for us. We'll be exploring it a lot more. We'll be integrating our platform with a lot of fundraising platforms so that, as an example, a volunteer can log into their portal and a toggle on the side would be fundraising. And in there, they can then see and easily, through an integration, be able to plug into your fundraising partner, like a Salesforce or a fundraising Just Giving, Blackboard, and be able to then see their live profile and be able to actively fundraise from their volunteer system compared to needing to have multiple logins to different things. Because I'm really interested to explore more about how volunteers can help push the message of fundraising, not just volunteering. Yeah, what do you think about that, Scott?
Yeah, I can't remember the number, the statistic, but it's something like volunteers give 20% more to the charity that they volunteer with. So they're regular givers, and obviously if there's a value alignment, then they're more likely to be encouraged to share that goodwill, both by time and money. Carolyn says here, guilty. Yes, we tend to think our volunteers give so much time already, we don't ask for help with fundraising. It makes so much sense for volunteers being the best ambassadors for fundraising. So, you know, that's kind of a common sort of a frame as well. Helen Yorston says, generally speaking, most volunteers give their time and talents, not financial donations. Often Centrelink clients with limited funds or older people on fixed incomes. I'd say, Helen, sometimes those older folks are the ones that have got bequests that we silently just aren't tapping into. Coming from my fundraising days.
Yeah, I think, Scott, I think both point of views there are right. Like, you don't want to be seen to be picking eyeballs from it, in a sense. Like, your volunteers are giving so much already, but if you can make it really easy, you're not telling them to do it. If you can make it very simple for it, just like volunteering, how do you make the engagement with them so simple and easy, and they feel like they're getting something out of it? And making sure they're feeling appreciated. And again, how do you automate those things? So, because it's easy for those things to fall through the cracks when you're just focused on filling the next roster, right? How do you automate your appreciation and thank you so that people want and feel welcome? If you can do the same with fundraising, is it not worth trying? And just seeing, if you sit it there in the portal saying, if you would like to, here's 2 clicks and you can start being a fundraiser yourself through an integration. That's going to be something we're going to look into closely, because I mean, if those results speak for themselves of that event in Perth with a few thousand volunteers, 40% of which taking up the ability to fundraise, either donating themselves or creating a fundraising platform, that's what charities are in the game for, is to raise funds. And if volunteers can help do so, then I believe it's worth asking the question. But I also understand why, from potentially a Helen's perspective there, you wouldn't be asking them to. So it's just a thought that I just sort of throw out there.
It's great to have this engagement, Shannon. It's been enjoyable to challenge our audience, and for our audience to challenge us today to some of these sorts of topics. So unless there's any final questions, we encourage you to kind of throw through in the next minute. We'll start wrapping up, and just let you know that our next webinar is, of course, Tuesday 2 p.m. next week. We have Andy Fryer from Better Impact on board, who's a bit of a legend in this segment. He's been, you know, probably doing volunteer management, I'm afraid, for as long as Shannon's been alive. No insult to either of them, I promise. Look, it's been really great, Shannon. Thank you very much, and we're getting some positive feedback through the chat function there as well. So thank you everyone for your support, and Shannon, our best wishes for the next steps and what is becoming a tremendous success story for Rosterfy. So best wishes as we step back and let you get on with your wrangling of a 9-month-old little girl.
Yeah, the lever. Yep, we'll jump in. No worries, guys. And thanks for joining us, and thanks for contributing to the chat today, guys. It's always more valuable, hopefully, for you guys if we're all engaging. So yeah, great work. And guys, feel free to just email me again. I'll put my email in there, and just feel free to send me a note. Ask any questions, and just happy to just speak and not even talk about Rosterfy. Just talk about how. There's a way that we can, bounce ideas, or, what are you seeing in the industry? Because we see a lot all around the world. So more than happy to just bounce and make new connections. So thanks for joining us.
Brilliant. Right, on that note, we'll end up. And thanks again, Shannan. Thanks, everyone. All the best, and we'll carry on. Cheers for now.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Bye.